everyone, I'm Chris from HC Media, here again with another episode of Stay at Home Studio. Today I'm excited to have my guest Jenny Arndt, who's the campaign director at Haverhill Promise. Welcome to the show,
Thanks
Jenny.
for having me, Chris.
Yeah, of course. So we are obviously in the middle of a pandemic. We're both working from home. At least that's what it looks like for you as well. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what you do, maybe with Haverhill Promise and what they do, and maybe talk a little bit about how this pandemic has affected your day-to-day job?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the campaign director for Haverhill Promise, which is Haverhill's campaign for grade level reading. So my job is really to get everyone in the city excited and on board and helping all of our kids. There's my cat. All the kids in the city read at grade level by the end of third grade. And there's lots of reasons for that I could get into, um, but mainly I work with the schools, I work with doctors, I work with other community groups in the city that work with kids on a daily basis, and just trying to address some of the barriers to reading for our students. And so I would say the nice thing about my job is I really can do it from anywhere. I basically work off of my laptop. I kind of jump around from day to day anyway. So that hasn't been affected so much. Um, I think, like most people in the city, I'm trying to get used to having Zoom meetings instead of in person meetings, which is kind of tricky, and there's always barriers to that. Um, and yeah, and I guess obviously the biggest piece that's really affecting my work is the students themselves and this learning disruption for them. So the COVID-19 crisis has become yet another barrier for some of these students that are having difficulty reading anyway. So we're going to have to try to pivot and navigate that in the next few months, in the next year or so. So that's going to be a little bit tricky.
Interesting. So I didn't realize would you say there's a bit of a epidemic in the reading world as well? Like, is how imperative is your position to, like, I guess, do a lot of kids struggle early on with reading?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that hinder kids from being able to read proficiently by the end of third grade. What we focus on with Haverhill Promise is um, three main priority areas. So we look at school attendance. So obviously, if kids aren't able to go to school, if they have health issues that aren't being addressed, if they have transportation issues or other problems in the home that keep them from getting to school, they're not going to learn. We also look at readiness. So kids that are able to go to preschool um, have a better chance of being able to read. So we look at expanding preschool opportunities and making sure that all families have the option of sending their children to some sort of preschool program. We also look at vision problems, kids who haven't had a vision screening and maybe need glasses. And then we look at summer learning. So that's that out of school time where a lot of children don't have access to books. They may not be able to get to the library. And so they've gone from having, you know, 9 months of school where they have access to all these books and to all these supports to now having almost 3 months off in the summer and not being able to practice those skills and not having access to the books to be able to practice their reading at home. And so they end up falling quite a bit behind their peers um, when they start the next school year. So there's all of that and many, many more things that I'm not even listing. Now we're adding into it this really strange learning disruption, which could, go until the end of the school year. Now, what do we do? Because now we're going to head right into the summer. And again, those same students that would have struggled anyway with the summer break have now added on all of these weeks of being at home and maybe not having those supports in place. So I would say that's actually what's keeping me up at night right now. I'm worried about health, but I
Yeah.
think I'm more worried about those students.
Let's go back 20 years when you and I were in school. I don't know if a lot of these resources were like readily available or at the forefront of people's mind, because I remember I could have definitely used a lot of these sort of extra attention resources, because I struggled with reading and I struggled with math, and not because I was behind or delayed in any way, but because I just didn't have, like, I didn't learn the same speed as
Right.
everyone else. So what do you think, in your opinion, brought these things to, like, attention of people and realize like we need to do something about it to the point where now we have the programs like this?
I mean, I think that it's just looking at the data. I think, we collect data constantly now. That's like what everything is about, especially in the education world. And I think a lot of times we just don't look at it. We collect it, but then we never use it. And so, what's been great in the city of Haverhill is that we've got a bunch of civic leaders and leaders in the education world that are like, we have this data, let's see what's happening. And so, if you really look at the numbers, you look at the kids that are behind in their reading, um, and then you look at, say, their attendance rate, and then you look at, you connect with physicians' offices, and then you see, okay, there's some patterns here. There's certain neighborhoods where this is concentrated. How can we focus on those neighborhoods? And I think I think it's really the data that tells the story that then helps us figure out, okay, where do we need to focus now, so that kids don't get, they don't fall through the cracks as easily.
Something like this, this outbreak, this isolation period, changes the way you do your job because now kids, like you were saying, can't get access to books, right? Physical books. They have to be disinfected, or they have like the libraries are closed.
Yeah.
So this changes things. How do you think moving forward, Haverhill Promise or other organizations like yours will address? Because obviously this has changed our world. So how do you think that they'll address future things like isolation periods or get kids more access to digital books? Like, is that something that you've talked about? Like, what are some things that will change, you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've had to navigate this whole, again, the equity issue, um, because there are tons of resources. The library is pushing all of their online resources, which are phenomenal, by the way. I just looked into, um, Hoopla, and another one that the library has spent a lot of money recently to bolster their collection. So really, there's just tons of books that are at our fingertips if we have internet access and if we have devices to be able to view these books on, and if you're the type of person who is able to sit down and read a book on an electronic device. And unfortunately, I don't think that that's every child in the city. I don't think my kid could sit there and read a book, on a Kindle or on an iPad. She really does much better with a physical book in her hands. So, thankfully, we have plenty of physical books. We have the ability to order books online if we need them. That's a position that we're in as a family. But that's not the same for every kid in the city. So we really have to get creative. And I think, honestly, we just have to get kids used to reading and accessing things digitally. Um, just tough.
Yeah, yeah, it is tough, and especially when you have a city like Haverhill, where not all, like you said, not all kids have access. I know that my wife's has two younger brothers that have done this remote learning
Mhm.
thing, and I'm sure your daughter, well, she maybe is too young to do that at this point. I don't know, I'm not sure, but a lot of kids don't have access to the internet. And when I was growing up, I wasn't even allowed to use the internet unsupervised. So like times have certainly changed, and you have to adapt now. And this might even change the future of snow days. Like kids may not need to miss school now for because of snow days, which hopefully will be good because it won't cut into their summer. But so maybe talk a little bit about, you did mention a few, and without getting too detailed because we don't want to obviously do that too much, but what kinds of roadblocks do some kids face when it comes to reading? Like when they're at home, obviously everyone's glued to their iPads now and their iPhones. So what is that something that you guys are battling with, is like technology? Because you obviously want to get a physical book in some kids' hand to teach them the value of a physical book, right?
Absolutely. I think, honestly, I think that the biggest thing, that technology takes away is actually that time with a parent or caregiver reading with their child. I think that we're kind of a culture that, if I need to get something done, I'm going to sit my kid in front of YouTube or somewhere where she's going to be, um, uh, I guess where she'll be distracted long enough that I can do what I need to do, right? And so I think that that's eaten into a little bit of that, quality time, because there is so much more to it than just sitting your child down with a book and having them practice reading on their own. There's that back and forth with a parent that's really important. Um, that's why, with Haverhill Promise, we're actually focused on birth through third grade. So we want parents and caregivers reading to their babies, singing to their babies, um, babies, toddlers, well before they're able to read or talk on their own, they should be being read to and sat with and have that quality time. So I think that's probably the biggest area that technology has kind of taken that piece of it away. And that piece is so important for brain development and for early reading as well. So that's another area that we're trying to focus on too.
What would you say are some of the areas that kids may miss out on by not reading or not being read to?
Well, there's certainly that a word gap. So there's a vocabulary disadvantage that they're at when they're not being read to or not being spoken to in the home. There's actually Springfield, Mass. Did something really interesting. I don't know if it would ever fly here in Haverhill, but they got parents at their library or families at their library to sign up for a program where they actually put a device on 3 and 4 year olds in the home that counted the number of words that were being spoken in the home. And then the families would report back once a week. They would download that data and they would share with the parents and make suggestions for how they could increase the language that was happening in the home. So they might say, "Hey, we noticed that around 5 o'clock every day, there's not a lot of language happening in the home." And it could detect between uh, if it was a screen, like a they could tell if it was human to human interaction or if it was words that were coming from a television or a computer. And so they'd say, "Hey, around 5 o'clock, we noticed every day that the words drop. Are you guys eating dinner in front of the TV? Maybe you can try eating dinner at the table and having some more conversation." So it would just give them these suggestions, and it didn't count. It didn't know which words were being said, so there was never any worry like, "Oh man, what are they recording the words that are being said?" It was just merely counting and giving suggestions, and it was really just about having more verbal communication happening in the home because that was what was so crucial to 2, 3, 4 year olds before they're even learning to read. And I thought that that was really interesting.
I'm glad it doesn't actually hear
Yeah.
what you're saying because I think that it's a sensitive subject too because nobody wants to be that person who tells their parent that or a parent that they're not doing enough with their kid or spending enough time with their family because we know all parents try and like that that's something that that sounds like a really brilliant way of like here's some suggestions, have you tried this, because maybe some people didn't grow up having dinner around the table and that's normal to them. So that being said, what are some things, maybe you're a parent, but what are some things that you would tell other parents or to encourage them maybe to do more of, or like how could they help their kid become a better reader?
Honestly, I think one of the biggest faults we have as parents is as soon as our kids become independent readers, we just want them to read independently, and we think that that's the best way for them to practice their skills. I think that one of the best things that we do in our home, my daughter's in 3rd grade. She's a great reader. I'm not concerned about her. She does do reading on her own, but I think that one of the even more valuable times we have in our home every day is when I read to her or my husband reads with her. And so she likes to read these little graphic novel kind of books, or it's like a regular chapter book, but then it'll have some comics. And so at night I'll read, the main text, and then she likes to read the little word bubbles. And I think that it helps her specifically with um, sometimes she knows the words, but she doesn't necessarily know how to read it the right way and pause at the periods and or at the commas and stop at the periods and things like that. And so hearing me read to her is really helping her kind of hone those skills as well, which are so crucial. It doesn't really matter so much if you know every word. You still have to be able to put it together in a way that makes sense. And I think that that's helpful. And so I would just say, and I guess I would encourage, we're always pushing reading 20 to 30 minutes every day at home. We've seen from research that um, even in the summer or during breaks, that helps stave off reading digression. But I would say to add on top of that, read with your readers, have parents read with their children who are already reading. On top of that is going to be helpful in lots of other ways. So, um, yeah, I guess that's the biggest thing is 20 to 30 minutes of reading at home, and just because your child can read doesn't mean you should stop reading with them. if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it makes sense. And something you brought up that jumped out at me was your daughter likes comics and pictures. So, uh, in your opinion, because you're an artist as well, or you're into the arts, is that
Yeah.
safe to say? How important are pictures versus just words? And is there ever a time where a child should move away from pictures and now you just read books with words and words only?
It's funny. I've heard varying opinions on this, and I definitely was concerned at first when my daughter was only wanting to read graphic novels and comics. And I think that the biggest takeaway, and I talked to her teacher about it. At school, they're getting all of the leveled reading that they need to improve their reading. They're getting everything that they need at school in terms of what reading they need to be able to progress. At home, outside of school, they just need to be reading something. And if your kid is all about the comics and all about the graphic novels, absolutely, that is what they should be reading at home, because it's more about creating um, lifelong readers. So, right, people that um, kids that are going to get out of school and still enjoy reading and still enjoy learning. That's only going to happen when you're reading things that you enjoy. So, I think that parents need to just let their kids choose whatever they want to read. Even if it seems to us like it might be below their level or it might have too many pictures, I don't think that that's as important as the fact that they want to sit down and read a book. Like, that's huge. And also, I will say the graphic novels, a lot of them have like pretty difficult vocabulary. I've been sort of surprised at some of the books that seem really too childish for her. And then as we're reading them, I'm like, I don't even know what that word means. So I think the fact that it has pictures might be misleading. When you actually look at the words, a lot of them are actually pretty challenging.
I really appreciate what you said because I'm a big advocate of, I think that I'm a very visual
Mhm.
learner. And this was something, again, going back to when we were in school, this was something that wasn't talked about. Like, you learned one way or you fell behind. And nowadays, it's just different learning styles. This has come to the forefront of education. Like, you have to cater to different learning styles. And something that I always tell people, and I'll take to my grave, I don't care what anyone says, I became a better reader because of the text-based video games that I played.
Interesting.
And yeah, and that's the truth. Like, I struggle with staying on task when I read a page. I had to read it 6 times to retain what I was reading. And when I would go home, I'd play video games, and a lot of the games I liked were there was no dialogue. It was just reading, and it was just block after block of text. And to this day, there are words that, as a grown man now, that I learned what they meant from a video game. And I only heard it in the video game the first time, and I learned what it meant and the context of how to use it from playing a text-based video game. So I think it's just absolutely like you said, who cares? They're just reading, right? Who cares what it is if it has pictures in it? So I think that's really
I,
profound
yeah,
discovery.
I
So
love what you're saying, and I think that that's something that this reading campaign is trying to do. We want to just get creative with how your kids are reading and how you introduce words. I mean, um, with little kids at the grocery store, it's easy to give them a phone and let them play a game or watch something so that you can get through your grocery shopping trip. But how many words are all around you in the grocery store day to day, that you could be pointing out? Or there's just so many different ways to incorporate reading daily. And if that is video games, if that is a grocery shopping trip and pointing out words, and I mean, I think we just want to create a culture where that is literacy rich, always, all the time. And I think the more that we can get that on people's minds, the importance of reading, the importance of reading with little ones, especially, the better off our kids are going to be.
yeah, and that's really encouraging too because I know that I'm not a big reader myself, but I definitely hope that if I have kids one day that I will read to them. My wife's a huge book nerd, so we have a lot of books in our house, and she loves reading, and so I think reading will be hopefully a regular part of my household, and it sounds like you're encouraging that universally, so that's
Yeah.
really great. Um, Talking about your artist background again, you've worked with Creative Haverhill,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
You yeah. So as an artist, with all the stuff you've done in your past with creativity, How has that now been a help to you with your new position at Haverhill Promise?
Honestly, I think that's one of the reasons that I got hired for the job. Um, I was pretty surprised. I thought for sure that the person that got the job was going to be someone who was kind of a literacy expert or an educator in their background. But I think that the steering committee that hired me was looking for somebody who could kind of think outside the box and think a little bit more creatively, and especially in kind of that community engagement piece. And really, I have an art degree, but my work with creative behavioral really was mainly community engagement. So it was getting the city excited about art and bringing people together around ideas of how to expand our art opportunities in the city. So it's a lot of the same kind of work, and really connecting people to people and organizations to organizations so that those that are doing the work can do it more efficiently, and make a greater impact. So I think that, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that the creative part comes in kind of that creative problem solving and connecting the right people to kind of solve this weird puzzle.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about I don't know the name, the proper term, so I apologize, but I've seen these little book mailboxes around the city of Haverhill. Is that part of the Haverhill Promise campaign, or is that something
So
different?
that's completely separate. That's actually like it's a national movement. They're called Little Free Libraries. And so those are just individuals, or businesses that decide to build these little boxes and put them outside of their homes or their businesses. And they're exactly what it sounds like. They're little free libraries. So anybody that walks by can take a book or leave a book. They're completely stocked by donations, and volunteers, and they're maintained by the people that built them and own them. And it's just a cute, really cool little movement that's sweeping the nation to try to get more books into neighborhoods where families may not have access to books or may not have transportation to get to the library on a regular basis, and to just get neighborhoods excited about reading. And I love them. I think that they're great. I think that they're very complementary to the work that I'm doing, and I definitely want to try to promote them and get more of them, because I think even if you're not using one of the little free libraries, you see them and you're like, oh, look how cute that is. And I know that it reminds me, oh, I should pick up my book today. I should do more reading, or I should donate some books. And so I love them simply as these little reminders in the neighborhoods about reading.
That's exactly what I was just gonna say. Is how cool is it to grow up in a world or a city or town where that's a regular
Yeah,
thing? Like you just walk by and you can just, hey, we're walking home from school. Let's grab a book or let's leave a book, or you can even make it into something fun. Like, hey, tell your kids like pick out your favorite book. Let's leave it for another kid to read. You
yeah.
know, like that's really really awesome.
Yeah,
So,
they've also been
um,
they're a really great creative opportunity too. So I've looked online. If you look up little free libraries on Google, you'll see people have made them out of old canoes. They've made them in trees, like little cutouts in trees. Um, it's like a really cool way for the neighbors and the people that own them to sort of express themselves. And I'm not gonna lie, that's definitely one of my COVID-19 projects that I'm working on every weekend since I can't go anywhere, is to make a little free library to put on my front lawn. So
I would imagine a lot of people probably are not taking books at this point in time because it's hard to know if they, people are worried about germs. But hopefully, when this passes, I challenge Haverhill to come up with something really creative. And I've seen a couple around the city, and they're really cute and creative
yeah.
ideas. So, in the final moments that we have, why don't you talk about some of the more favorite parts of what you do? Like, what makes you get up and go to work every day, and what drives you forward with this?
It's a good question. I mean, well, obviously, the students, there's kind of a sense of urgency behind it that I didn't have so much with the arts. Art was wonderful. It's not going anywhere. Of course, I wanted people to appreciate art and partake of it more. But with the kids, there really is, like I said, that sense of urgency. I worry about the third graders that are graduating this year, right? And going on to fourth grade. Um, if they're too far behind, I'm like, oh man, we missed them, right? And so obviously there's that's a motivator, right? I don't want classes of kids to to keep getting promoted and falling behind, because we do know that especially in the economically disadvantaged homes, 80% of economically disadvantaged students who are not reading at grade level by the end of third grade will continue to struggle all throughout school. And that breaks my heart. So obviously that's a motivator. But really, on a more positive note, it's just seeing how many people are responding to this campaign and responding to the fact that we need to get our kids reading proficiently. It's like it's one thing that everybody understands. And so I'm day to day I'm having conversations with you know, doctors or retired teachers or just random people who don't even have children in the city who are saying, "What can I do to help? How can I be a part of this?" And I think that that's really encouraging and really motivating, just seeing that, okay, everybody gets the importance of this. Um, and everybody wants to play their part. And so I think day to day, that's really what keeps me going. Is it changes every day. New people, new players come into the picture that are like energized about this and want to do something. And that's pretty awesome. And that's kind of the story that I want to tell the rest of the city.
I think that's huge, and I really resonate with what you said there, because I think that there's nothing really like the feeling of falling behind compared to your peers. I've been there. I know what it's like, and it was very, very different back then when we were in school. And I won't go there, but I think teachers are a lot more understanding now and more forgiving now of the student who's maybe not keeping up. There's a lot more resources to help them. So thank you for doing your part and for encouraging us today as parents, potential parents, leaders in the city, to help drive this campaign to keep reading. So I know I was encouraged by a lot of the things that you said. So, and I'm not even a big reader, so thank you for sharing, and thank you for your time. Just with maybe a minute or less, if you have ways people can learn more or get to connect with you about anything that you've talked about, do you have a way of networking
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
folks?
I would encourage people to go to haverhillpromise.com and just kind of learn a little bit more about our initiative. And also, we have a reading challenge that's going on in the city right now as part of this COVID-19 learning disruption. So, if you go to the website, you can find out more about that. And the challenge is just read for 20 minutes or more every single day that kids are home during this time. And that goes for adults, kids, anybody who wants to participate. And we're giving out some gift cards and other cool stuff for people who participate. So check that out. You can sign up for our email list through the website, and all the contact information is there as well.
Well, Jenny, thank you for your time and thank you for being here. If anybody wants to catch more of these shows, you can watch all of our Haverhill Community Television shows on haverhillcommunitytv.org, and where all of our shows are always available online, and also Haverhill Channel 22. This is at Stay at Home Studio. I'm Chris, and we'll see you next time.